Today's conversation is about happiness and how we can be more happy. Everybody from philosophers and thinkers and psychologists and even economists have long tried to define happiness. And more than a simply positive mood, happiness is a state of well-being that encompasses living a good life with a sense of meaning and deep satisfaction. Something we all trying to have, in fact. But how to achieve that? That's why I've invited Steph, the happiness consultant, to tell us a bit more about it and give us a clear picture and practical tips that we can use. Hello, Steph.
Hi, Melina.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm great, thank you. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. So I've invited you today to tell us a bit more about happiness and to give us a clear picture and practical tips that we can use. So my first question really is, how do you define happiness?
Well, that is certainly the oldest question in the history of humanity. And as you said it earlier on, there's been a lot of definitions from philosophers, great thinkers, and probably it all started about, 2,500 years ago. And what's really exciting is that science eventually got into the game of happiness quite late, because they only started looking at it about 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. But we now have a definition of happiness that is backed by scientific measures. Not just philosophical talks or subjective evaluation. Mm-hmm. And, also, as you said in your introduction, what is really interesting is that somehow, consciously or not, whatever we do, whatever we hope for, whatever we dream of, whether it's a successful career, financial freedom, whether we want a healthy family, whether we want to travel around the world, what we want ultimately is happiness. So being happy is a primary concern in our life, and still we need a definition for it. So if that's okay with you, I'd love to very, very quickly give you a brief overview of the historical definitions, because you'll see some of them are pretty close to what science has discovered in recent years.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah? Go for it.
Okay, so I'm going to be very quick. But so for Confucius, the Chinese philosopher, happiness had an outward orientation. Happiness had to do with the welfare of others. Happiness was related to what you were doing to make other people feel good. Then moving on to Buddha, very different definition. For Buddha, the path to happiness was about recognizing that life is a roller coaster and accepting that there are some difficulties in life, there are some conflicts, and there is some suffering. And most of the time, we can't really do anything about it. So it was about accepting what life is throwing at us. And the second point from Buddhism is that as human beings, we suffer a lot because of illusions. The illusions that we need certain things, and I'm talking about, material things, but also love from other people. And we end up being too attached. And we do live in a world that is ever changing. And by being too attached, we create a lot of suffering for ourselves. So the practical recommendation from Buddha, for example, was to practice equanimity, composure, calmness, and compassion. And that was the path to happiness. I'm not going to name them all, but I also wanted to have a quick mention for the Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle. Totally different point of view on happiness. I mean, for these guys, they were talking about the principle of moderation, where happiness was about living a life of virtue. Actually, happiness required a lot of work and discipline and devotion and courage and moral strength. It was a bit of an ordeal. The idea that they were developing was that as humans, we were miserable because we were always desiring things that we didn't need and more of them. And the idea was actually to resist temptation. So you see quite a few different definitions of happiness over the years already. And the last one I'm going to mention is totally opposite, actually. It was in the 17th, 18th century, and it's the hedonistic movement. And I think it all started with the French. They're always to blame for something. The French encyclopedia declared that everyone had a right to be happy. And then suddenly happiness became a right, Pleasure is good, pain is bad. And the idea in hedonism was just to pile in as many sensory pleasures as possible and try to avoid pain at all cost. So this is just a brief summary of what philosophers have been talking about over the years. And then psychologists started looking at the topic of happiness. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go into details, but I'm sure you've heard, I'm just going to mention one. I'm sure you've heard of the hierarchy of needs, the pyramid of Maslow.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was in the 50s, and basically the model he developed was that we can only reach happiness or self-actualization once we have met our basic needs. And so, it's this sort of pyramid of needs where at the bottom you have all your physiological and safety needs, such as food, water, warmth, rest, security. And then moving upwards onto psychological needs with ideas such as self-esteem, a feeling of accomplishment, intimate relationship, friends, social connections, and so on. And then at the very top of the pyramid, is the actual, happiness, the self-actualization. Mm-hmm. So, but that was a model. When I'm starting to get very excited talking about happiness, I think for me, one of the guys who had a massive impact on the research of happiness is a guy called Ed Diner. Mm-hmm. And I think it started in the 80s. He's a professor of psychology at the University of Illinois, and he decided to flip the coin. And instead of trying to cure people from depression and anxiety from the illness point of view, he decided to study happy people. And he was the first one. And he thought, well, maybe if I study happy people, I'm going to find common behaviors, common traits, practices, habits. And maybe if I identify them and apply these behaviors to the people who are actually suffering from stress, anxiety, or depression, we could help them. So no need to say that the science community turned their back on him for quite a while, thinking he was a complete nutter. But he really went for it. And luckily, on his journey, a few of his professor of psychology mates joined him, and they made some absolutely amazing discoveries. And I think this is when the real research on happiness started. That's the late 80s. He worked a lot with another psychologist called Martin Seligman. He's the positive psychology pioneer who then ended up developing his own happiness model. Mm-hmm. It's called the PERMA model. I'm not going to go into detail of all of those. I think these were really the start of us, getting an idea of what happiness was. Mm-hmm. But well-being and satisfaction, in other words, happiness, in these models have always been self-reported. So all these psychologists, they've been measuring what we call subjective self-reported well-being. Okay? So basically they were asking happy people, how do you feel? Mm-hmm. And you know what subjective well-being, it's subject to one's personality. Some people are more, optimistic than others and always happier than others. So this sort of reported well-being depends on people's personality, depends on one's circumstances in life. You can just have had a job promotion or a child, and suddenly the sense of your well-being is actually affected by what is happening to you in life. So, and sometimes subjective well-being can be affected by little things such as the weather. So I can't really say it's totally scientific. It was a great first step towards our definition of happiness, but still very subjective.
That's amazing. That's actually fascinating what you're saying. So So it's all a little bit about a mindset, and it's down to every single person.
Yeah, so really what happens, and this is when I get very excited about the whole topic. After all of that, neuroscience started looking at happiness, and it all started in. I'm not going to bore you with history, I promise you, but this is such an amazing discovery that totally revolutionized the world of psychology and related to happiness. In 2001, Professor Richard Davidson and a group of neuroscientists decided to study the brain of Tibetan Buddhist monks. And the results were absolutely astounding. They noticed that these people's brain activity were nothing like that ever measured before. Nothing like at all. So they decided to put through the same test a group of people who'd never meditated before. So I think they took about, I think it was, I mean, I might be wrong but with the numbers, but I think they took a group of like 60 people from the tech environment in, I think it was in San Francisco or somewhere like that. And they put them through an 8-week mindfulness training course. These guys had never meditated before. They put them through an fMRI scan, checking their brain. Their brain was like, everything they'd seen before. And after the 8 weeks of mindfulness meditation training, they put them back in the scans again. And guess what? They found significant changes in the pattern of their brain activation and even in the structure of their brain. And that's when we discovered neuroplasticity. So we discovered in 2001 that our brain changes throughout life as a result of our day-to-day experiences and activities. Okay? Wow. So this is when neuroscience and psychologists started pairing together and working together. Okay? What they found out as well, which is key to the science of happiness, is that positive and negative emotions look very different in the brain. When you're very happy, you're joyful and energized, you get very strong activity in the left prefrontal cortex of your brain compared with the right side. And when you feel depressed, anxious, or nervous, it's the opposite. You get really high activity on the right side. So this research and what they found out about neuroplasticity actually demonstrate that the ratio left prefrontal cortex to right prefrontal cortex actually determines your level of happiness. And what this research also demonstrated is that meditation and mindfulness have a huge, huge impact on your happiness capacity. Okay?
Wow. Okay, so we should start by meditating.
Yeah.
Probably.
Okay. So as I said, the neuroscientists and psychologists decided to start working together. So, all this information that has been aggregated about subjective well-being, now they had the capacity to actually confirm it with tool and scientific measures, such as brain activation, brain structure. Then they started measuring neurotransmitter release in the brain. And, well, that's really amazing because now we can confidently say 3 things. It's totally backed by science, right? So, first thing, ironically, what we believe would make us super happy most of the time has a very, very small contribution to our happiness level. And I'm sure we'll talk about that later. Point number 2 is that certain physical activities, mental habits, and practices allow us to significantly and sustainably improve and increase our sense of happiness. Okay. And number 3, which is super exciting for you and me and for everybody today, is that as a result, becoming happier is realizable. You have the power to hardwire your brain for more happiness. So regardless of what life throws at you, regardless of the circumstances of your life, with a bit of brain fitness, you have the power to become happier.
Oh, okay. Brain fitness. I love that. Okay, I'll have some of that.
Okay. another bit of research that I would really like to share with you, and that's a theory that has been developed by an amazing lady called Sonia Lyubomirsky. She's a professor of psychology at the University of California, and basically she discovered with a few professor researchers, friends of ours, that 50% of our happiness capacity is a genetic predisposition. You've inherited it from your parents and you can't really do anything about it. Okay? So, these people who are super happy. They enter a room, they see life through pink tinted glasses. They're always happy. It's great. Whatever happens, they bounce back. And then we also know these people who are, whatever happens, they're always grumpy. And well, that's part of our genetic predisposition. They also found out that 10% of our happiness depends on our circumstances. And that's quite a small percentage when you know that inside circumstances, they put our comfort, our wealth, our job, and our health. But the great news is that the 40 remaining percent, we actually have the power on it. These 40 remaining percent that has a huge impact on our happiness is actually our habits, our daily practices and intentional activities. So, as a sort of conclusion, 40% of our happiness capacity is in our hands. We can actually activate that by our intentional activities and daily practices.
Okay.
So, really going to the core of the definition. I'm just going to very quickly tell you what happiness is not from all this scientific research, okay? So again, it is self-reported but also measured by neuroscience and by biology. So happiness is not about having all your personal needs met. Happiness is not about feeling satisfied with life all the time. Okay. Happiness is not about feeling pleasure or positive emotions all the time. Happiness is not about never feeling negative emotions. Happiness is not about never being sad. It's not related. And happiness is not something we seek, right? Okay. It's not something we look for and we find like your car keys that have actually dropped under your sofa seat. No. Okay. And actually being too obsessed about happiness and wanting to become happy at all costs and, looking for it, striving for it may cause quite a lot of harm. So we're going to go into the definition now, really. And happiness really is a byproduct of the way you live your life. It just happens as as you're on the ride. So the definition, after all this history and after what it's not, happiness really now we know is the ability to enjoy positive emotions and pleasures in life. Yeah. And at the same time, having the ability to bounce back from difficulties. Okay. So, and what's really interesting is that we know that people who experience emodiversity, so people who have a large palette of emotions, from positive emotions, but also including negative emotions, are systematically much more happy than people who have a life just with positive emotions. So it is important to embrace the good and the bad, to find that, that inner thing that is happiness. Because at the end of the day, it is something that you build for yourself through practices in order to make the most of the roller coaster. You remember when at the beginning of the conversation, I was, mentioning Buddha. Yes. Life is a roller coaster. There is, there's some good and some bad stuff, most of which we can't control. So happiness really is about enjoying the ride, enjoying the good stuff, and bouncing back from the bad stuff. And it is a mindset. It's got not very little to do with what happens to you in life. It's about how you perceive what is happening to you and actually how you decide to react to it. Okay. So with a bit of brain fitness, you can rewire your brain to become happier.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, so we want to have a bit of that and understand a bit more about the mindset. So you're saying some people have this mindset more than others. So maybe for the others and everybody, for for people's benefits, how do we achieve this mindset and how do we rewire our brain? Like how do we do this brain fitness that you're talking about?
Okay, so just to reassure you, quite naturally, I would say that my happiness set point is very low. I'm naturally I'm quite a pessimistic person, and my
Okay,
glasses are quite dark.
right.
And I'm the prime example that by applying all these techniques, you can really change your mindset and raise your happiness level in life.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So, I mean, through all my various studies and readings and experiences, I've developed more or less a 6-week program articulated around the 6 key elements of happiness.
Okay.
So I'm going to maybe give you a little overview of these key elements of happiness.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Is that good?
Yeah,
okay.
absolutely.
So I'm going to list them first. So the 6 key elements of happiness I would like to talk about are: number 1, social connections.
Okay.
Number 2, compassion and kindness.
Yeah.
Number 3, cooperation and reconciliation. Number 4, mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, positive habits and toxic behaviors. And number 6, gratitude.
Okay.
So social connections, well, we are a social species. Our connection to other people is absolutely instrumental to our happiness. And I'm just going to share a few research with you just to demonstrate that.
Mm-hmm.
Very happy people have rich and satisfying relationship, and they spend very little time alone compared with people who are just average happy. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Research by Dan Kahneman suggests that the experiences in life associated with the most positive emotions are: number 1, intimate relations; number 2, socializing. Okay, and that was an open question asked to people. What are the experiences in life that you associate with positive emotion and happiness? The first 2 that came out: intimate relations and socializing.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and another research that was absolutely brilliant. I can't remember who actually did that. I think it might have been Lieberman. I'm not sure. But they plugged people into an fMRI scan, and they were playing a game all together.
Mm-hmm.
And when people were excluded from the game, the brain areas that lit up were exactly the same one as when people are feeling pain. So the sense of participating, feeling connected, being part of a group is really, really important for our happiness.
Very good. Okay,
so that's the social connection part. Talking about compassion, kindness, cooperation, and reconciliation, they are what we call prosocial skills. Compassion, kindness, cooperation, and reconciliation. What we know is that all the positive emotions are less, and experiences are less heritable than the negative emotions, right? But we also know that the brain structures involved in positive emotions, such as all of them, compassion, kindness, and so on, are more plastic, they're more subject to change. That means that all of these skills, we can cultivate them, okay? And the more we practice them, the better we get at them. And our capacity to be compassionate, kind, cooperative, and so on increases naturally. So this is great news because again, we're talking about mind fitness here. So compassion is rooted in our brain and our biology. We are wired as human beings to respond to others in need. And actually, when we are expressing compassion, we know that our heart rate slows down, that our brain produces oxytocin. It's the hormone of bonding.
Mm-hmm.
And our brain also activate the pleasure and reward centers. So compassion makes us happy. Kindness, and so there are a lot of ways, and little exercise to practice our compassion. Moving on to kindness. Kindness is a very easy one. I'm sure you've heard of the random acts of kindness.
Yes.
Exercise, right. The kindness and happiness loop is amazing because the kinder you are, the happier you become. The happier you are, the kindness you are.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a virtuous circle. It's brilliant. When you train your mind to be kind, you see a rise in your daily positive emotions. You're doing good to someone else, but actually it is activating all the reward circuits in your brain. Kindness makes you happy. And it's also one of the most contagious of the human behaviors. So, wouldn't it be absolutely amazing if we were all slightly more kind? I don't know if you remember that movie. I'm digressing a little bit. Do you remember that movie called Pay It Forward? That little boy at school who had a project.
Oh, yes.
He thought that if he was kind to 3 people, and each of these 3 people in turn would be very kind to 3 people, it would create a world of kindness.
Yes.
It's true. It is very true. This model is true. Kindness has a huge ripple effect.
Oh, okay.
So the random act of kindness is great to boost your happiness. Wake up one morning and just tell yourself, okay, today just be kind, totally randomly, without expecting anything, to 5 people.
I remember this guy giving free hugs in Trafalgar Square.
Oh, I love that. Did you have one?
No, I didn't really, but I remember seeing him wanting to hug everyone, and people would go and hug him back. That was so beautiful.
It is, and so I had no intention of mentioning it today, but the science of touch is actually part of the science of happiness.
Okay.
In orphanages, with a lot of mortality, babies were just dying in the 60s. They actually realized that there were no reasons why these babies were dying, and because they were fed, they were looked after, they were safe, and they actually introduced touch. So more people to hold them in their arms, and they saw the mortality rate decrease by half. I think that was in the 60s, 70s. So the science, touching people physically is very important for our happiness and our survival.
Yeah, that's incredible.
So cooperation is another key element for our happiness. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but as human beings, cooperation is more intrinsic to us than competition. And cooperation actually activates a part of the brain. It's called the orbifrontal cortex. It's a reward circuit part of the brain. It gives us not pleasure, but a satisfaction that is so intense and sustainable that it really contributes to our happiness. The other element that is key to happiness is reconciliation, peacemaking, and forgiving.
Okay.
Conflict is inevitable in life, and learning to make peace, to apologize, and to forgive is key to our happiness. And again, we have little tricks to learn. It's a skill that we can learn.
Mm-hmm.
There are ways to apologize that are more efficient than others. And being able to forgive is key to our happiness. And once again, forgiveness is not about condoning something that happened, saying it's okay. It's not about that. Forgiveness is about making the decision to be at peace, making the decision to leave the past behind and to move forward. And forgiveness is a trainable skill, so it's a big part of the science of happiness. Forgiveness lowers blood pressure, lowers stress, lowers depression, increases optimism, hope, compassion. Brilliant tool for happiness.
Amazing.
Another tool I mentioned, another, element of happiness is mindfulness.
Yes.
So, it's a big word. It's everywhere these days.
Yes.
You find mindfulness in offices, in hospitals, in schools, and that's great news. So I'm not going to go too much into detail about it, but mindfulness is the awareness that arises by paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally. But now we know that mindfulness has got a massive, living in the present moment, non-judgmentally, has got a massive impact on our happiness. 60% of our time we're mind wandering.
Yes,
that's enormous. So by training yourself to be in the present moment, you are happier. We know there's been an amazing research done by a guy called Matt Killingsworth. He developed an app called trackyourhappiness.org, and he had, I think, 15,000 participants, and he asked them 3 questions. How happy are you? How are you doing? Are you thinking about something else than what you're doing? And he noticed that mind wandering causes unhappiness.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So learning to be mindful and living in the present moment has got a huge impact on your happiness. And very quickly, just to finish on those, the good habits of happiness to cultivate are optimism and self-compassion. I mean, it's, quite obvious, but optimism is something that we can cultivate. Again, the more if you try to consciously be optimistic about things and situation, or if you find it very, very, very difficult to be optimistic, at least try not to be pessimistic. You're actually training, it's a muscle basically in your brain. You're training yourself to see things with, a bit more sunshine.
Yes.
And the toxic behaviors of happiness, these are very interesting because a lot of us fall into them unconsciously. They are perfectionism. So, we all want to be perfect somehow. And, our employers expect us to be perfect at what we're doing. Not very good for our happiness, to be too perfectionist. Materialism is a killer for happiness and social comparison, but we might talk about it later on. And the last one, last but not least, is gratitude. So it's still a big topic these days. Yeah. Everybody talks about it. Again, it's a behavior that we can cultivate. And when we're grateful, we get higher flows of neurotransmitters like dopamine in our brain, our sleep patterns improve, our stress reduces, optimism is boosted, our immune system is stronger. So again, it's something we can work on. And with all these 6 elements I've talked about, we're exercising self-directed neuroplasticity. Okay, we are actually voluntarily changing some part of our brains to increase our ability to be happier.
Okay, all of that is great. I mean, these 6 areas to work on, that's an amazing program to have in hand. But can you give us, small tasks, small things that we can do on a daily basis to feel happier? More like, concrete steps that maybe you do in your daily life?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, as you said, these are 6 key elements, but I mean, some of us will be more prone to go towards gratitude, and for some of us, gratitude is not very attractive, and they'd rather work on self-compassion, for example. So it's really down to us to sort of, find our own happiness fit, or down to me to help you find it. Yeah. But just to give you, maybe just a few things that are pretty easy to implement and to boost your happiness. So I have a little routine that I do every day. I call it my Switch the Happiness button.
Oh, great.
So, and it's composed of 4 things. And they are the 4 things that work best for me, and they're very easy. I'm like everybody else. I'm sure I'm like you and quite a few people around. I don't have enough hours in the day. So I have, no time to sit in a pretzel shape and meditate for an hour and a half every day, unfortunately. But I've built that little routine that works really well. Number 1, I set an intention for my day.
Okay.
Number 2, I meditate. Number 3, I take mindful breaks in my day. And number 4, I have a gratitude journal. So just very quickly, setting an intention, there is some science behind it, right?
Okay.
It could go from anything from, I make plans, but I'm going to stay open-minded to the surprises that life throws at me, and I'll try to say yes as much as I can.
Okay.
Or it could be, today I'm going to spread kindness around like confetti. If only a smile or a compliment or listening with 100% of my attention, I will give kindness today. So it could really be anything. It could be, today I'm going to see the world with my pink glasses and see opportunities and be optimistic, right?
Yeah.
It is setting an intention. So before I get out of bed, I spend about 3 minutes setting an intention for myself. And I can't really, give you a lot of information about how it's science-backed, but I think it's very related to the placebo effect.
Okay.
So you take that little pill of sugar, the doctor tells you it's going to cure you, and as if by magic it works, right? So, science is doing a lot of research at the moment on the placebo effect. We still have no idea how it works, but it works. And it is related to the power of intention. So why not every morning when we wake up, give ourselves an intention to have an amazing day, an intention to, give love and receive love, an intention to whatever it is you want to do.
Mm.
And that's the first thing I do. The second thing I do is that I meditate. And as I said, you don't have to stay locked in a pretzel shape for hours. The secret about meditation is regularity. So it's always better to meditate 5 minutes every day than 1 hour once a week, right?
Yeah.
Here we are talking about brain fitness with meditation. Fabulous if you're a spiritual person and you meditate for other reasons. You're still doing brain fitness, brilliant. But if you're not spiritual at all, just take it as a brain fitness exercise. And meditation has huge impacts on health and happiness.
Definitely.
Mindful break. So I spent years of my career in the corporate world having a sandwich at my desk. Keeping on working, and it is just so important to disconnect the mind throughout our days. So I have a few breaks during the day if I can, but a lunchtime break definitely. And whether I'm working from home or working from a client site, I will always try to go outside, regardless of the weather.
Okay.
Go outside and try to stay in the present moment. Not evaluate what's happened in the morning or think about what's going to happen in the afternoon, but really have a proper break.
How many mindful breaks do you take in a day?
So,
apart from lunch?
Ideally, I would take 3. Okay. So I have an alarm set on my phone with a lovely little chime noise.
Right.
I have one at 10 o'clock, one at 12:30, and one at 4.
Okay. Oh, nice. Okay. So you have a little reminder.
Yes. And that's so ideally, if I can, I take 3 minutes, just 3 minutes. And what I usually do is a breath awareness. I close my eyes, I breathe, and I just, try to stay away from thoughts. Just be in the present moment with my breath.
Amazing.
But to be very honest, in the reality of life, most of the time I just do the mindful lunch, my lunch break.
Yeah.
And the last one is gratitude at bedtime. So, we know that on average we have 3 times more positive than negative experience throughout the day, but because of the negativity bias of our brain, our brain really loves negative stuff. We tend to forget the good things. So isn't it nice to just in the evening? So I have this little notepad under my bed, and when I'm ready to go to sleep, I take it out every night, and it just takes about 3 minutes. It doesn't have to be long, and I just throw whatever comes to mind, anything I'm grateful for that's happened during the day. And again, gratitude is a muscle, if I may say. It's a habit that we can cultivate, and the more you're grateful for things, the more things there are in your life to be grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
So gratitude triggers optimism and hope, and gratitude is amazing. It improves sleep patterns, it reduces stress, boosts optimism. Gratitude also gives you a stronger immune system. It's good for your health. So yeah, that's what I do.
It's really inspiring ritual.
And it's not a complicated one.
No,
exactly. It's only 4 points, so everybody should,
Yeah, exactly. Should be able to do their own ritual, and like you said, what works for them, for sure. One of the other things that I wanted to ask you is that sometimes we tend to confuse certain things. So, for example, pleasure and happiness, and success and happiness, and money and happiness. And so I wanted to kind of go into that and talk a little bit about the differences between these. So we tend to be seeking pleasure by, a lot of like instant gratification, like we say, like loads of likes on Instagram, loads of dresses in our wardrobe. It's quite instant, it's quick. The more I read about happiness, the more I realize that these two are, they work in tandem, but they're very different. So what's your point of view on that?
You're absolutely right. We live in a pleasure-seeking society. So we're looking for pleasure, and so we get that sort of a little moment of exhilaration, but then it fades away pretty quickly. So we need another one, and another one, and another one.
Yeah, exactly. It's like adrenaline. Yeah.
More food, more money, more things. And, for some people, it's more alcohol, more sex, more drugs. And, you can get into a spiral of addiction. Pleasure has got nothing to do with happiness. So I think the first big difference is that pleasure is a sensation that evolves and changes. For example, imagine that you're at a dinner party.
Yeah.
The hostess for dessert brings you this beautiful chocolate cake. You really want a slice, right?
I love chocolate, so I'll go for it for sure.
It's homemade. It looks delicious. You have a slice. Absolutely delicious, right? That's pleasure. Now imagine that the hostess puts the whole cake in front of you after the first serving and tells you have to eat the entire thing. It's an enormous cake. And you have to eat all the slices. Yeah. Okay? After the second or the third, for sure, you will feel pure disgust for the cake.
That's
right?
Yeah, that's right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so pleasure and happiness are not the same thing at all. And pleasure always comes from an outside source. I mean, in that case, it comes from the cake. Okay? Yeah. It's contingent upon time, upon an object, upon a place. And what's really interesting as well is that pleasure is not radiating outside. So you can feel intense pleasure while other people around you are miserable, or even worse, they're suffering. So pleasure is self-experience. It's not something that you share with other people, really. It's not contagious. Okay. So, I mean, for example, going back to the chocolate cake, so you have your first slice and it's an absolute delight, right? Mm-hmm. And your neighbor, who is sitting at the dinner table, who is the most polite person, hates cakes and hates chocolate, but decides to eat a little slice just out of politeness for the hostess. I mean, this dude is going to have a really hard time here while you're going to be experiencing pure pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
With happiness, it doesn't work like that. Happiness is contagious, you know? Mm-hmm. I mean, you sit down with a friend having a chat and you feel super happy. Mm-hmm. Your friend will definitely feel, lifted. Happiness is like sunshine. It just warms people around you.
Yeah.
It transports people, and happiness is an inside job. It's something. Pleasure comes from an outside source. Happiness comes from inside of you. That reminds me of the phrase, "Oh, you have everything to be happy."
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
right. That makes no sense. Yes, I've got a roof over my head. It's. I mean, the guy who talks a lot about that and who's brilliant is Bill Gates,
Yes.
obviously,
Yeah.
mega millionaire.
Yeah.
And I really like to follow him on Twitter because he always posts the most beautiful things about happiness. He's really sussed it out that happiness is an inside job. It's about connections. It's about kindness, compassion, gratitude. It's got nothing to do with pleasure or money, if you want to talk about money.
Yeah, that leads to my next question, actually. There's a tendency to think that happiness relates to money and wealth, and studies show that money is not linked to happiness, but at the same time, you can get anxious and unhappy if you don't have enough money. So how does happiness not linked to being financially safe?
You know what? I think there's two things that we say that are totally wrong. Money doesn't make you happy.
Mm-hmm.
That is totally wrong. I mean,
yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Go talk to someone who's homeless and lives in the tube in London.
Exactly.
Of course, money is going to contribute to their happiness.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, money can buy you happiness. Yeah, well, that's totally wrong as well. And again, I mean, Bill Gates talk about it a lot. So, and the idea, I think a lot of research has been done out there, and actually a lot of research. You remember I talked about Ed Dina, that guy who flipped the coin, and Martin Seligman.
Yeah.
They did a lot of research about the connection between wealth, income, and happiness. Mm-hmm. And what their research suggests is that when your basic needs are met, mm-hmm. home, food, and security, more money does not seem to make you any happier. Mm-hmm. So basically, the difference in happiness between someone who earns £5,000 a year and £50,000 a year is enormous.
Yeah.
But the difference in happiness between someone who earns £50,000 a year and 500 million a year is not much at all.
Yeah. That's insane. Yeah.
And you know what? And again, we were talking about pleasure. You want more and more and more. Mm-hmm. That's the hedonic treadmill. It's hedonic adaptation. Yeah. You have one thing, it gives you pleasure. The pleasure fades away. Mm-hmm. You want more. And here we go again, and more and more. So the more money you have, the more things you can buy, but it doesn't change your happiness. But then, on the other hand, money boosts people's happiness when it lifts them out of mm-hmm. impoverished circumstances.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, if you know what I mean. But there's, I think something else is really important is the cultural context and also social comparison. Mm-hmm. And when I was talking earlier on about one of the toxic behaviors for happiness, I mentioned social comparison. Mm-hmm. It is really toxic habit. Mm-hmm. And I read a study the other day that was really interesting. They were talking about the Maasai, in Africa. Yes. With the big necks,
yes.
and the ears and stuff.
Yes,
and they virtually have no income and no wealth at all. The only thing they have is their cattle. Mm. But their basic needs are met, right? Mm-hmm. They are safe and they can eat and drink, and they are not exposed to any Western media. They have no idea what other people have. And their level of happiness is much higher than some people who have much more than them, but who are exposed to what other people have. And, for example, you take a homeless person in London who will definitely have a greater income than the Maasai, right? Mm. But they'll be considerably less happy because they're exposed to other people's wealth.
Yeah, exactly.
To what others have and they don't have.
Yeah, we are always exposed to more successful people, and so we compare ourselves, and then it gets us feeling a bit unhappy and not successful.
No, happiness is an inside job. It's something that it's a byproduct of your behaviors and your intentional activities and your habits and practices, but it comes from within. It's got nothing to do with the people around you.
Yeah.
So, but what's also really interesting is that Ed Diener and Martin Seligman actually did a really big research on money and happiness, and their results suggest that happy people are likely to make more money than unhappy people in life. Yeah, because they're happier.
Yes,
they're more
trapped.
Optimistic.
Yeah.
They have better connections with other people.
Mm-hmm.
They take bolder risks. They have no fear. They seize opportunities, and then they're able to go on ventures that eventually might be more money making than just doing nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that attract, a lot of opportunities as well, because people who are happy usually attract opportunities.
Absolutely.
Like you said, it's contagious. So
yeah, and you were talking about success earlier on,
yes,
right?
Yes.
What is success, really? I think that's that's the first question. And unfortunately, I would say that in our society, when we hear the word success, we automatically associate it with achievements such as studies, career, and money.
Yeah,
okay.
Definitely.
But so if this is the definition of success, well, success does not make you happy, because then again, we are linked to the pleasure part of success. Do you know what I mean? So you have a goal, you reach it, you're exhilarated, high, euphoric. Do you really feel happy? How long does that last? Well, it might last a day, a couple of days, or a week. That's not happiness. Happiness is a sustainable inner feeling. Yeah. That's more a kick or a pleasure. Yeah. And then you enter the hamster wheel, chasing new goals, and you need more and more. And then you end up being focused on the end result, sometimes slaving away for the end result, which is a day of so-called happiness.
Exactly.
So... it's really counterintuitive, because we would think that, by focusing on goals and being successful we'd build happiness, but it's actually the other way around.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of research, done about the correlation between happiness and success. Mm-hmm. And happy people are more successful than unhappy people. Mm-hmm. But successful people, in terms of career and money, there is no impact on their happiness capacity. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So happiness can really help you becoming successful, but being successful doesn't mean that you're going to be happy or not, because it's something else. So happiness actually is an amazing catalyst towards success.
Shall we move on to a new question? Being happy, being healthy, how the two relate exactly? How does being happy relate to health and our well-being in general?
We know that when you're happy, you are going to live a longer life. It's got an impact on your life expectancy. And there's been a lot of research done by Sonia Lyubomirsky. Mm-hmm. This is actually quite not scary. It's pretty exciting. The estimates are that at any moment in life, when you're feeling really happy, like 8-9 on a 10-point scale, it's going to add 5 to 7 years in your life expectancy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Later in life, if you experience boosts of happiness, it is estimated that it will add 20 months to your life expectancy.
Okay.
And I mean, these figures, they are proper research, scientific research, right? Done. I'm not throwing some made up stuff. Happiness has a huge impact on your physical health. Again, a lot of cross-sectional data. When you're happy, you have fewer chronic pains. And mindfulness is also absolutely amazing at pain management. Mm-hmm. You have less likelihood of diabetes. Happiness is super good for your heart. You have a more robust cardiovascular profile when you're a happy person. Okay. Happiness strengthens your immune system. Happiness combats stress. It minimizes all the biological changes that are triggered by stress in your body and allows you to recover much more quickly. And happiness is brilliant for your social health as well. When you're a happy person, we talked about it at the very beginning. You have very strong social connections, and social connections are really good for health. There's been a lot of research done with the elderly. When they feel lonely, their life expectancy shrinks. Surely you've heard of this story of this old couple who's lived together their entire life, built a family, and unfortunately one of them passes away, and the other one just happens to die a few months later while the person was in perfect health. You're happy, it's good for your health, but it's also good, it has ripple effects. It's good for your friend's health and your family's health and your colleagues' health.
Okay, so we do need to throw confettis, like you said, around us.
Yes, definitely.
Start with within, but then throw it around you. Okay.
Absolutely.
To wrap up, my last question was, what's the easiest thing that you advise and that you do to improve our well-being for people like us who don't have a lot of time?
For me, the easiest thing to do is a gratitude journal.
Okay.
Because it takes 3 minutes. You go to bed every day, right? So you can't miss it.
Yeah.
Okay. There's going to be a moment where you're going to put your head on the pillow, put the notebook under your pillow or on your pillow.
Yeah.
And just take 3 minutes to write a couple, 2, 3, 4, or 5 things you're grateful for. And within 10 days, I guarantee you will notice a shift in your mindset. You will notice that there are so many things. If you have the ability to open your eyes and open your heart, somehow to see all the beautiful stuff that is happening around you. So I'd definitely say gratitude journal is a great first step.
Thank you so much.
With pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got great learnings. It was really useful. Thank you.
I'm very pleased. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Steph. For more of Steph's advice on happiness, visit her website, thehappinesssociety.com. Now over to you. Let us know what you think about this episode. And if you have any questions or any guests that you recommend, then send me an email. That's it for this week. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.